So now that you've read a little bit about Lorraine Hansberry in my last PowerPoint, as well as an introduction to the characters and a summary of Act 1, Scene 1, I have a short slideshow here on setting, characterization, and symbols. And so my suggestion is that you have your book or the play itself, if possible, open so that you can look over the quotes that I'm going to mention as I go through, because I'll occasionally give the page number from our book as well as a quote that I think that goes along with what's going on in the play and what I'm talking about at that particular time. So the setting. Of course, we know the setting is a cramped apartment. There's no private bathroom. There's a lack of light, and the play takes place entirely in this apartment over the course of a few weeks. And we do find out as the play goes on that it's either on a Friday or a Saturday. I don't think that matters very much, unless you may want to think that there's more together time on the weekends, because later in the play we'll see they're cleaning house and Beneatha's going out on a date at one point. And normally those things are reserved for the weekend, as well as moving day, which comes far later in the play. On page 788, there's some personification of the home. And personification is when something that is not human is given human-like qualities. Now, the once loved pattern of the couch upholstery has to fight to show itself from under acres of crocheted doilies and couch covers. And then later, the carpet has fought back by showing its weariness with depressing uniformity elsewhere on its surface. So even the furniture itself has a weary quality and it feels it. The idea of light we see. The single window that has been provided for these two rooms is located in this kitchen area. And she puts two in quotation marks because that suggests it's really just one room, a den and a kitchen that's sort of divided into two. The sole natural light the family may enjoy in the course of a day is only that which fights its way through this little window. So the light is fighting as well. The chair fights, the carpet fights, the light fights. All of these things suggest sort of a pressing against or a nature of they're trying to get the best that they can out of the worst type of situation. We know that Travis sleeps on a pull-out couch. We find that out later. Beneatha and Mama share a bedroom, and Walter and Ruth share a bedroom. And they fight with the Johnson family and others about who gets to use the bathroom first. Characters. In this first section, which is not even the rising action yet, but the introduction, we're introduced to all four main characters. So pay attention to the italicized portions that describe the characters. Here is where we get a sense of why life has handed them, who they are, and how they survive. We also learn about Big Walter and what he wanted for his family. He was the patriarch of the family until he recently died. So remember, the four main characters are Mama, Walter, Ruth, and Beneatha. So Ruth and Walter are fighting at first, and they're both fighting and having a few bits of humorous, loving conversation, like a normal couple would. So Walter comes in and says to his wife in sort of a humorous way on page 791, just for a second, stirring them eggs, it's gone now. Just for a second it was, you looked real young again. Then, dryly, it's gone now, you look like yourself again. And Ruth says, man, if you don't shut up and leave me alone. And Walter replies, first thing a man ought to learn in life is not to make love to no colored woman first thing in the morning. You all some evil people at 8 o'clock in the morning. So a little bit of fun, bickering, natural humor. But then we see that there's more serious to this, an argument, where Travis, let's talk about that for a moment. Travis comes in, and we're going to talk about the notion of the 50-cent piece as a symbol later. But Walter gives him the 50-cent piece right in front of Ruth. And that immediately showcases the tension between the two of them in terms of his pride and her realism. Walter at the bottom of 793 says, "You tired, ain't you? Tired of everything. Me, the boy, the way we live. You wouldn't do nothing to help, would you? You couldn't be on my side that long for nothing, could you?" And then Walter propositions Ruth to speak with Mama about the liquor store. Ruth knows that Walter needs something in his life. And right in the middle of page 794, man say, "I got to take hold of this here world, baby." And a woman will say, "Eat your eggs and go to work." Man say, "I got to change my life. I'm choking to death, baby." And his woman say, "Your eggs is getting cold." And Ruth wearily replies, "You never say nothing new." We get the sense that Walter has tried different kinds of ways to make money, and they have not succeeded. However, the prospect of a life insurance check of $10,000 could really make a difference to him. Benita enters on page 795. We get a sense of who she is. She and Walter play around a little bit in their argument, but again, it becomes serious. Benita says the money belongs to Mama, and Walter says on page 796, "You just got your mother's interest at heart, ain't you, girl?" And that's verbal irony right there, sarcasm. "You such a nice girl. But if Mama got that money, she can always take a few thousand and help you through school too, can't she?" And later, Walter reveals what's really on his mind about this, besides his jealousy and the fact that he really believes that he's sacrificed more than she's given to him, as well as his sexism. "Who the hell told you you had to be a doctor?" Page 796. "If you're so crazy about messing around with sick people, then go be a nurse like other women, or just get married and be quiet." So this is a sign of the times, but this is also a sign of Walter's character. Mama enters on page 797. She brings in her plant, and we'll talk about the plant for a minute. Or a little bit later on the next slide about symbols. On page 798, she begins speaking with Ruth. And at the bottom, Mama says, "What done got into you, girl? Walter Lee done finally sold you on investing?" And Ruth says, "No, Mama, something is happening between Walter and me. I don't know what it is, but he needs something. Something I can't give him anymore. He needs this chance, Lena." And Lena so far refuses because it's a liquor store. We find out even later in this chapter that Lena is quite religious, and her faith would prevent her from allowing that money to go toward a liquor store. What we find out on 799 is what Mama really wants to do with the money. She says, "Some of it got to be put away for Benita and her schooling. Been thinking that we could maybe meet the notes on a little old two-story somewhere, with a yard where Travis could play in the summertime." So that is Mama's dream. And as soon as that comes out of Mama's mouth, Ruth pitches in too. Ruth and Mama have the same dream. They have a dream for stability for their family, and it is a realistic dream. On the other hand, Benita and Walter are both extraordinarily idealistic. We find out when Ruth, Benita, and Mama start talking on pages 800 and 801, all of the means of self-expression that Benita has tried and wants to do. She has a guitar lesson. She rode horses before. They bought her camera equipment. She was in a drama group. All of these things are her way as a college student of trying to find herself, trying to find her identity. And that will become a theme throughout the rest of the play. On page 802, Mama, Benita, and Ruth keep talking, and George Murchison comes up, the suitor of Benita, the one who's taking her out on dates, who's very wealthy. And yet, she says on page 802, if the Youngers are sitting around waiting to see if their little Benny is going to tie up the family with the Murchisons, they are wasting their time. Ruth says, you mean you wouldn't marry George Murchison if he asked you someday? That pretty rich thing? Honey, I knew you was odd. And Benita says, he's shallow. And later she says, first I'm going to be a doctor. And George, for one, still thinks that's pretty funny. I couldn't be bothered with that. Remember, we're in 1959. And this is also an African American woman who, if she were admitted to medical school at all, would be the only Black woman in her class and would probably face a lot of gendered and racial stereotypes as well. On 803, something interesting happens regarding the theme of religion, religious faith, and how it appears in the family. We already know that Mama has faith, but we find out that Ruth, as a college student, does not. She is almost taking the idea of self-expression and faithfulness together. As a college student, is trying on different kinds of identities. And she says, God is just one idea I don't accept. And what's the end result? Mama slaps her. She puts her in her place. Ruth and Walter both share a little bit of arrogance. Maybe more than a little bit, a lot. And we'll see more of that come up as we go along. The end of this, there's an interesting quote on page 804 where Mama compares her plant to her children. They spirited all right, my children. Got to admit they got spirit, Benny and Walter, like this little old plant that ain't never had enough sunshine or nothing, and look at it. And the end is where Ruth feels faint and somewhat collapses. So let's move on to symbols. So we've already discussed the plant. We're still on page 804. Literally, Mama compares her children to the plant. She essentially uses a simile, a comparison of the two. And the plant symbolizes what can grow without light. It symbolizes spirit. It symbolizes hope. And there are lots of ideas with that plant, just building on that you could run with as we continue to see this plant survive throughout the course of the play. The 50-cent piece we already talked about. The 50-cent piece is not just money. It's not just a piece of money that's used as a form of currency or exchange, but it is that notion of what matters to Walter and what matters to Ruth. Walter wants to look like a man who can give his son that money without any trouble, that he wants his son to look at him with pride. And Ruth realistically knows that if he gets that 50-cent piece that they obviously needed for something else, food or shelter or clothing, that it would be hardship for the family. And so that idea plays when we just see the two of them looking at each other over that 50-cent piece. The life insurance check, of course, it's not just a check that's coming in a mail, but it is a piece of paper with money on it that symbolizes hope. It symbolizes the deferred dreams that can possibly become realized now. Walter wants a liquor store. Benita wants schooling. Ruth and Mama want a house. We know this already. And finally, the apartment itself. It's not just an apartment, but it's a symbol of many different things, I think. Their love as a family, their hope and desire for something better, because they've lived in that apartment for almost 40 years. They've raised family and grandchildren in that apartment, but the apartment also symbolizes their poverty. So those are some opening thoughts. Keep those in mind as we continue on throughout the course of the play, and I will provide some more notes as we go along. Okay, bye-bye.